the CPMs of YouTube are like a third, a half, a third, a lot of times of like a traditional TV placement. And so you can reach a ton of people that are highly engaged and, highly targeted and stuff like that. So there's still a lot of really good opportunities.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Paid Search NYC podcast. Today, very excited to be chatting to Jack Hepp, who is the owner of an agency in Montana called Industrious Marketing. Industrious focus on Google Ads for local businesses. So we're going to be going deep on Google Ads for local in this episode and talking about the tactics and strategy for those types of businesses in 2025. So very excited for that. But before we jump in, Jack, welcome and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Awesome. So before we actually jump in, we do like to start off with a little bit about kind of your career journey and kind of how you've got to where you are today. Obviously, you're the owner of your own agency, and prior to that, you worked various places, held various roles. Talk us through what that career journey looked like, and how it kind of brought you up to then starting your own thing.
Sure. Yeah. So I got my first job in marketing, I think like 6 months out of college or something like that. And originally I was kind of I guess you'd call project manager for a full service agency. And I did that for a while, and then they had some clients. This would have been like 2014, 2015. And they started getting some clients that were interested in doing digital marketing, and it wasn't something they'd really offered before. And basically they were like, hey, you're 20 something and you know how Facebook works, so you want to do the digital marketing? And I was like, sure. So I kind of started taking out some stuff there, and we used like some vendors and stuff early on, and then I started learning how to do things and stuff, and so then moved to another agency from there where I ran the digital side of things for about 5 years, and joined another agency kind of specializing in Google Ads for a little while, and then split out from there on my own about I guess it's been 3 years ago now. And so been pretty much focused on Google, still do some Facebook and stuff like that. Early on, I actually did a lot more Facebook advertising than I do now, but I've kind of shifted towards Google the last several years. So.
Got it. This is probably getting into the topic straight away, but I'm interested to know why the pivot from Facebook to Google. Was there a separate reason for that other than that kind of aligned with the work you were doing and then ended up doing your own agency, or was there a different reason?
It kind of aligned with how things worked, but I liked Google better, honestly. So when the second agency I was at, I was doing both for a long time, and we ended up hiring somebody to help me. And she took on a lot of the Facebook advertising at that time. And I kind of focused in on Google then and just preferred it and enjoyed working in Google more. And so kind of specialized in there. And I think I like the results you can drive with Google, and I just like the platform better, I guess.
Yeah, same. But shout out to everyone in social. It's still a great channel.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm glad they do it. So
yeah, indeed. Talk to us a little bit about what it's like to actually take that leap and start your own agency and do your own thing. What was the process or the series of decisions you made that kind of got you to that point?
Yeah, going back, I've always wanted to work for myself, even back in like high school and college. My dad had a construction company, and so I just kind of always had that desire, I guess, to work on my own. So early on, I started, when I was at the last couple agencies I was at, I started doing some stuff on the side, and had a client here or there on the side that I worked with, and kind of started getting a feel for it, and what it was like to have your own clients, deal with the accounting side of things, all that kind of stuff that you don't necessarily have to do as part of your traditional employment role. And so that was kind of my first exposure to it. And then the last agency I was at, I was really fortunate. The gal who owned it had an opportunity to do some other stuff that she wanted to pursue, and she came to me one day and said, hey, like, I want to do these other kind of things. Not going to have a spot for you. Would you like to take some of the clients you've been working with and go out on your own? My initial reaction was, oh my God, I have to find a job. But after after took some time to settle down and stuff like that, I was like, oh, this is like the perfect opportunity to get a go out on my own. And so I had a couple of my own clients already, and then she kind of provided me some own, and she actually kept me on, helped her with a few clients as well for a while. And but she really helped me jumpstart out on my own. I was really fortunate to kind of bounce out immediately with clients and stuff like that. And no matter what you do, it's always you've always got to be learning and ready to pivot. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And the other thing I've learned too, and I've heard it from a lot of people, is no matter what you do, you'll have days where everything feels great and days where everything feels like it's going to fall apart. And it does not change how long you do it. So.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that before. I think it's so interesting hearing about people's journeys into running their own thing. And it seems like you kind of touched on it there, but the freelancer journey is a little bit different to like the owner of an agency journey, just because like maybe it's a bit more involved. You've got people, there's different skill sets. What was the thing that was the steepest learning curve for you going from being an employee, paid search expert, to agency owner?
Yeah. I think, and I think it's something I'm still learning too, is figuring out how to consistently generate business for yourself. Like that's not necessarily I was on sales calls and I was on that kind of stuff, but all of a sudden when you're solely responsible for making sure that there's, leads coming in the door and trying to, close them and that sort of stuff, that was a lot to learn. And really just recently I've started to bring on, I've got like a contractor that I have help, and I have a part-time employee at the moment that's helping me and stuff like that. And so that's just been this year that I've started doing that. And that's been a really big learning curve as well, is how having employees and how do you handle it, and how do you, I'm not good at delegating. I'm not good at, I'm very much here, just let me do it. And so that's been something I'm actively trying to learn now, is how do I get better at handing stuff off to people and trusting them to get the work done and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, super hard skill. As someone who has to even do that within an agency, like definitely a learning curve to that, and then to do have to do that at the next level outside and with your own thing. Yeah, super hard.
Yeah. When you own the whole thing and it's solely on you for the results coming out the other end, then that kind of changes everything there. So.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That feels like an okay segue into the topic today, which is Google Ads for local businesses. So you talked there a little bit about how the sort of need to bring in business. I guess before we get to that, let's start off with how effective is Google Ads for local businesses today? It feels like there's obviously been a lot of change with the Google algorithm in terms of like broadness, so broad match, PMAX, etc. And sometimes at a very top level view, it can feel like if you're trying to target a very niche group of people in a very niche location, then sometimes those tools might not go well with that. But that's me talking from a very bird's eye view. So I'll pass it over to you to explain the reality. Like what does it look like, and how important is it with Google Ads today?
Yeah. You nailed it. It's gotten a lot more difficult in ways that the evolution of Google Ads, especially in the last several years, is beneficial to businesses with a lot of data and a lot of budgets. And those are the exact two things that most local businesses do not have. I still find Google Ads to be really effective for local businesses. I still think it's a great opportunity for them. It's still one of the few places where the end user is telling you exactly what they're looking for, right? Like they're telling you exactly what service or what product or whatever it is that they need at that moment and that they're interested in. And for businesses that don't have the budget and the ability to, build top of mind awareness and brand awareness, where, somebody's thinking of them when that issue presents itself, Google still gives them an opportunity to be in front of that person when they're actively trying to make those decisions. And so I think that's still extremely powerful for local businesses. And then there's some kind of niche things, like you talk about like local service ads for service-based businesses. Again, kind of unique ad type and a really good opportunity from Google for for those types of businesses that really isn't replicable anywhere else. And so, there's still a lot of really effective opportunities. Even like YouTube provides opportunities for businesses to get. I talk to a lot of local businesses still that spend a ton of money on like traditional TV ads, and I'll sit down and say, hey, look, we could hit, the CPMs of YouTube are like a third, a half, a third, a lot of times of like a traditional TV placement. And so you can reach a ton of people that are highly engaged and, highly targeted and stuff like that. So there's still a lot of really good opportunities. But smart bidding and, broad match, PMAX, all those sorts of things, there's a lot of challenges for local businesses in that, especially if they don't have the budget or the data available to, really lean into using them.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. One thing I'd like to just break down there for anybody who isn't familiar with LSAs, tell us more about how they work.
Sure. Yeah. So they're completely different than everything you could think about with Google Ads. So they, the biggest thing I'll say, like the biggest unique thing is it's not pay per click. It's pay per lead, actually, is how Google does it. So LSAs typically show at the top results. They are, if you've seen them, they'll typically have like a headshot or maybe like, some sort of business photo. And then the options with them are phone calls or messages. And you'll see like a lot of times they'll have like a Google guaranteed badge, a little green badge next to them that says Google guaranteed, or it'll say Google verified as well. And so that's kind of some of the unique things with LSAs is Google will actually a lot of times do like a background check on owners. They will ask for like insurance information. They'll ask for license information, those sort of things. And they actually verify, that this is legitimate business. These are legitimate. They have the things that are required by law, that sort of stuff. And so so then when the business actually pays is if somebody clicks to call and calls a phone call, or if they click and they message the business. Those are the only ways. And Google has an automated system now that determines whether or not those are good quality leads. And you're supposed to only be charged for leads that are good quality. So, like actually somebody calls and is like, hey, I'm looking for a job. Those are supposed to be screened out and not charged for them. It used to be manual, and of course now it's automated. It's I find it to be fairly good. Sometimes you still get some bad ones that sneak through here and there. But other than that, I mean, you set the budget, you connect it with your Google business profile, images, upload everything Google needs, and a lot of it from there is pretty much just relying on Google to show the ads to somebody.
Got it. How much of that kind of ad type, how big is that as a proportion of overall lead volume for most local businesses? And I guess it probably depends on the size, but do they typically represent like a 20, 30, 40%, or does it really just vary?
I think it can vary. So some industries are crazy competitive, like realtors, lawyers, and that's typical for regular Google ads too. But some of it can really vary based on. I have a roofing client that we use them for. There's a ton of roofing, so some of it will depend on that. The more competitors there are, the more variability there is in how often your ad will show. I have one client where it's probably about 50-50 for their leads. I have another where it's like 20% of their leads a month, and it can kind of vary from there. So it really can depend a lot on, like I said, how competitive it is, what you're willing to spend, and some of those kind of things. So,
yeah. And this might be a stupid question, but in those results, if you're searching, can there only be one LSA?
No.
Multiple?
Yeah, there can be multiple. So typically there'll be like the initial list will show one or two, and then there's usually an option to click more, and it'll scroll down and it'll show you like almost every business that's running them. And that could be 10. It can get pretty long depending on how big of an area and how many people are doing it. So yeah, who shows up at the top varies, and I think Google kind of tries to rotate it. I don't know what the algorithm is and what determines who shows at the top, but that's obviously one of the more valuable places to show. But then they do have the full list there as well.
Got it. Yeah. The reason I asked that is if it worked the same as every other ad type in terms of it's auction based, there's 2-3 spaces, and it's not like a winner takes all situation. Because obviously, if it is just one placement, then that's a different dynamic. But
Yeah.
it sounds like it's the same as others. So that's that makes life slightly easier, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. And the downside is there's just a lot less you can do as far as in a traditional account. There's lots of ways to try to make sure you're among the top, and the LSA, there's less of an ability to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So that feels like a pretty standard tactic, and even though it varies, it usually represents like a decent proportion of volume for those local businesses.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the other tactics that are more sort of non-local specific, thing like I start off with PMAX. Like PMAX for leads has been something that generally people have definitely had some thoughts on. That product's got better over time. How do you think about PMAX for local businesses?
Yeah, I would say it's my second favorite local type behind search, which is probably kind of a weird claim, but so PMAX has some really unique things for local businesses that are pretty cool. So some businesses will get access to store visits as a goal inside of Google. Those are the eligibility for those is really kind of basically you have to have a business profile attached, and there has to be enough store traffic to that business that Google determines it hits privacy thresholds and stuff like that. And if kind of all those things align, it'll automatically appear in your account, and you'll be able to optimize campaigns to store visits. And essentially, Google tries to estimate how many people have seen your ad or clicked on your ad and then come to your business at some point in time. Obviously not perfect, but it's for especially businesses that rely on foot traffic, it's one of the better metrics you can hope for. So the cool thing with PMAX for local businesses is you can optimize towards store visits. You can even optimize towards like get direction clicks on your business profile. And as well as like phone calls, leads, those sorts of things. So there's kind of a lot of opportunities in there for them. And then I think it's one of the better ways. It's the second best way to show up inside of like the map placements on Google. And that's, a really powerful place for most businesses. People, they tend to go search like restaurants near me, or they're searching, local stores or whatever it may be. And so PMAX is an area where you actually have an opportunity to get inside of those, inside of those map placements, as well as like, if you've ever browsed maps, you see the little square pins on them. Those are, promoted pins. Those will come out of PMAX as well. And then beyond that, you get display and YouTube placements. And I think that those have a good amount of value for local businesses because your location extensions can actually appear alongside those. And I think Google's gotten better at showing those in front of people that have a level of intent and some of that kind of stuff. So now, is it easy to show like a return or, make sure you have qualified leads and stuff like that coming out of PMAX? That's still tough. For a pure lead gen business, I still don't like PMAX a lot. But if they're retail or if they're foot traffic focused, then like I said, PMAX is one of my favorites to use for them.
Makes sense. It's just to repeat that back. It's like the most valuable part of that for local businesses is access that mapped inventory. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you could optimize to store visits, that'd be the other piece of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Store visits. I think we spoke about this briefly when we first met about how feasible it is to like match those numbers back to reality. Like, is there like a third party or a way to like match that data? And it sounds like there probably is, but it's expensive, and not everyone has access to that data. Mm-hmm. So we are kind of relying on Google's numbers a little bit there. But to your point, that sort of measurement plus the inventory is probably the most sophisticated ad we've got access to when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, like when I compare these things against like what the other options are, it's local radio ads or TV ads or, newspaper, so it's still a much better, it's a lot more than you get with a lot of other types of, ad placements for local businesses. And at least it's even if it's not perfect, at least it's a signal that you're hitting the right people. You're not just kind of shooting in the dark and hoping that it's working.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so talk about LSAs, talk about PMAX. What's the next thing in the local business Google Ads arsenal?
I feel like we should talk about standard search, because that's probably my favorite ad type for local businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's standard search is still my default go-to for a local business. If they're a service and they're eligible for LSAs, that's usually high up there too. But standard search is still, we still are able to get, like I said, we're going to put ads in front of people who are telling us exactly what they're looking for, exactly what they need. And for local businesses, that's, a lot of times we're not trying to capture, somebody just browsing the internet, trying to entice them to come buy something or something like that. Like they're telling us, I have this problem and I need this service, or I want to visit this type of store, or, whatever it is. And so standard search is still one of the best ways to get in front of those types of people. And my go-to is still exact match there. I used to do a lot of exact and phrase match keywords. I've found phrase match to be a lot. It has all the broadness of broad match and none of the benefits of the machine learning and signals and stuff that broad match uses. So I've shifted much more lately towards just exact match in those kind of accounts. If we can hit conversion thresholds and have the data available, then we may expand into testing broad match as well. And then from there, some of the biggest things to focus on are, localizing your ad copy and making sure people know that you're local, you're here, you're part of the community. We can serve you quickly. You're not trying to bring, it's not some faceless corporation from somewhere. And then, assets or ad assets or, the former ad extensions, it's still weird to me, are still a really big part of that, especially location extensions, or location assets are, a really big piece. That'll get you into the map placements, and as well. And then, kind of allows people to click to get directions or get more information, those sorts of things. And that's really common for local businesses. And then, phone call, phone assets are still a really big piece, for a lot of businesses. As much as technology has changed things, people still pick up the phone and call, a local service business or a local store or whatever it is. And so for some of my businesses, phone calls will be 30-40% of their lead volume that comes in. And so those phone assets are still a really important piece of standard search campaigns.
On the point around broad match, I think you did mention it, but the main limitation or worry before leaning into that is a volume / conversion data. Is that's purely the main concern?
Yeah, I think what I've found is that if broad match doesn't have enough data, it behaves like the broad match that we all remember and didn't like from years ago. Where it's just like matching to anything and everything everywhere. And so I think, broad match has, with the signals it can use, like it can use information off your landing page and from other keywords in the campaign and those sorts of things. Like there's a lot of really good stuff, and especially like local businesses run into search volume issues because people just search really unique things or really long tail keywords to try to find services and stuff like that. And broad match is a great option for reaching some of those. But if you don't have the data for, the machine learning and smart bidding and stuff to, have the intent and have that kind of stuff, you can run into issues where you end up bidding on a ton of competitors or really informational type stuff. And local businesses don't tend to have the budget or the ability to deal with the waste and stuff like that as the algorithms learn like what's working and what's not.
Yeah. Do you find any success with micro conversions where you've got those issues of not enough data?
Yeah. Yeah, so micro conversions is a big one that we'll use. So it kind of depends on what what the business type is, what we'd use. But I will use micro conversions for a lot of times for service businesses. We maybe won't be able to generate like SQLs or close deals, generate enough of them to make smart bidding effective. So we might move down to like MQLs or some sort of download or something like that. That's
Yeah.
has a level of intent with it. I've even gone further down than that. To maybe we're measuring some sort of engagement on the website or some things like that. I try to avoid those things if we can, just because it's not the highest intent level. But I've run add to cart can be a really good one for retail or e-commerce businesses that aren't hitting conversion thresholds. We can use that as a micro conversion. And then like get directions or some of those sorts of things that you can fall back down onto. Like those are micro conversions we use as well. And we find using those is a lot better, and having the volume from them is a lot better than just trying to like force things to work off of some sort of low conversion volume.
Yeah, I really like that element of testing into what's working, because it just feels like an area that is less likely to be overtaken by AI. Where you're trying to find like what is the data point or what is the conversion action where there's enough volume and there's also an indication of quality. And it's really difficult to know from the outset what's going to work, because in one industry, it could be fairly easy for the system to work out what that person looks like. In another industry, it can be really difficult. And so that those volumes are sometimes slightly different. I know there's best practice around like 2-3 conversions, but I think that element of testing feels like something that is still very human-led in terms of like the strategy and how we test that stuff.
Yeah. I agree. And I think I get to spend a lot of time on like one more time on that kind of strategy too. Like I'm not adjusting bids every day, right? So
yeah,
so I'm getting to kind of like work with clients and figure out that strategy and like what can we do, or even like I've worked with clients to set up like we've done like quizzes to try to drive people through a quiz to build like a level of intent and volume, that kind of stuff. So sometimes I get to work with clients too, and like, hey, what kind of offer, what kind of conversion can we come up with and make that will help us get the volume we need to make ads effective, but also like gives us the quality we need to not just track form fills that could be of who knows what kind of type of quality.
Yeah, and I guess you also probably spend time talking about like what are the things we can change on the form that actually increase the quality or the conversion rate up. Well, probably the quality is more the thing I'm thinking about that doesn't decrease conversion rate. Like I know we've worked with clients before where it's like, have you tried just adding this one form that adds like a little bit of friction in the process, might reduce your conversion rate, but it validates the user to such a higher extent that it like overcompensates for that. I think that kind of testing is quite fun as well.
Yeah. It's like it feels like this fun little needle to try to thread. Like
Yeah.
What can we ask for that like will chase out those people that are obviously not who we want to reach, but we also don't like completely tank the conversion rate. So it's kind of a fun little, I don't know. It takes a lot of experimenting, I guess. I actually just did it recently with a roofing client. They had a really basic form, but we'd have job requests come through and sales pitches and I don't know, every terrible thing you could think about. And so we added questions about like insurance claims, types of roof, current shingle type, some of those sorts of things. And it made a big difference. Like it cut way down on the number of spammy stuff, and the lead quality that's come through is way higher. It's just it's a lot less leads, but they're way better quality. So
yeah, I wonder is there a common approach or way of thinking about that form and the optimization process there, or is it just so independent to the business and it involves you having to look at like their data to see like, well, what's coming through that isn't, and then how do we combat that? Or is there some sort of best practice way of thinking about how to optimize the form?
My favorite go-to is to talk to salespeople. Like go to the salesperson. Like, what are the questions that you ask? And that was one thing I did with this roofing client is we had their head of sales in, and we said like, what are the first like 3, 4, 5 questions that you ask everybody that comes in. And that was, like roof type, shingle type, do you have insurance? Like those were things that they needed to ask no matter what. And so like, whether we filtered those people out at the form fill level or at the, salesman level didn't really matter. And so that's kind of one of my favorite, I guess, best practices. It'll vary based on business and what, like a small B2B business is going to be way different than a B2C one. But pulling in sales, I mean, like, hey, what are 3, 4, 5 questions you're going to ask that we could use in this form? And they always have great opinions too on like, I think this is too far. Like, don't go into this because people get weird when you ask this question. But people are fine answering these kind of questions. And so it's kind of a nice sales marketing blend you can find there.
Yeah, that's awesome. It makes so much sense. Like really going to the source, people who are actually speaking to customers, and get that like really high quality data. I'm assuming that's something you set at the outset with new clients is like, this is how we work. We need access ideally to these people, this data, because this just levels up what we can do for you.
Yeah. And that's a big, because with local businesses and, especially have limited budgets and stuff like that, like I try to have a really honest conversation at the beginning and like it can be hard. It may not work. We may not generate the results you need, but here's the things that we can do to try to make it, as effective as possible. And that's, those are some of the kind of things that I, bring up early on, like, hey, like let's post that. Cause like another thing I'll run into is, you'll get businesses where you're driving leads, but nobody's following up with them. And, or they're following up with them a week, 2 weeks later. And then they're like, well, none of these leads are working. Nobody wants, nobody's following up. And I'm like, well, how long is it taking you to contact them afterwards? Well, it's a week, 2 weeks later. Well, of course, at that point, they've talked to somebody else or they've found another solution or things like that. So those are definitely conversations I try to have early on. And you have to have a good process for what happens when people come in, to make the ads actually effective.
That's really interesting. It's almost like in the world you operate and the clients you're working with, then you need to be good at end to end, literally getting the ads out, putting the ads in front of people, capturing that traffic, and then following them all the way through, because you know that process, you know what that flow needs to look like, you know the drop off points. But also, if you don't do that, then there's a risk that someone's going to cut off or turn off your activity because they're like, well, it's not generating anything.
Yeah.
But that's because they didn't realize that two steps through the flow, no one's doing anything. So it's quite interesting. I guess you have to be an expert in end to end.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I've learned through trial and error, and like accounts, like an account, I'm like, wow, we're driving a lot of leads and stuff, and then 2 months in, the client calls you, you're like, this is awful, we're not getting anything, like what's going wrong? Like, hold up, wait, and so yeah, I think I've kind of learned that as I've gone, but it's, I think it's a challenge you don't always see with like, obviously e-commerce is like, you have that data, typically you're pulling in purchase data, so you have that information right there. Even bigger lead gen clients and stuff like that, when I've worked on those types of accounts, they often have like a Salesforce or a HubSpot, and all it is connecting that and it's flowing it in, and they already have a process in place where they're moving things through MQL, SQL, close deals. But you don't have that a lot of times with local businesses. Even larger regional companies that I've worked with that are, maybe they're multi-states and stuff like that. Sometimes they still have just really old systems or really old practices. You'll run into salesmen that like, they don't want to follow up with the online leads because they feel like they're bad, and so they seem to get like lower priority. So you can run into all sorts of weird little weird things. And so yeah, it very much can be like, hey, how do we troubleshoot some of these kind of things? And with local businesses too, I think you get more time to work on that kind of stuff, because a lot of times I only have maybe 2 or 3 campaigns at most, and with automation and stuff now, there's only so many things that I can do inside of those accounts. And so to make them effective and stuff like that, I have to go beyond that campaign and like, what else can we do that's going to help get us the data and get us the information we need to make these effective.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's definitely harder in that, but I'm trying to think of the parallels with e-commerce, and I think whilst it's not the same, there's probably a bit of similarity there in terms of like revenue versus profit. So if you're running, Google Ads shopping PMAX and things look great and ROAS looks great, and a client says, well, actually the profit's going down, it's like, because the PMAX thing has leaned into all the low AOV, high conversion rate, low margin stuff. So that again means that you need to have an appreciation for not just what you're doing, but like the impact downstream. But it's just a bit shorter. With you, it's obviously a bit longer in terms of all those steps.
Yeah,
I think it's still obviously useful to have an appreciation for that.
Yeah.
The other, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that's something that like paid search managers are gonna have to lean into more and more. Like the more stuff gets automated in platform, like where do we spend our time and where do we show our value? And that's even e-commerce. Like you might spend time and you find like there's some weird like hiccup in the checkout process that's causing people to abandon their carts way more often, or there's some weird thing that happens, in shipping or something like, so I think it's different. Like for what I do, like it's a different type of that, but there's still a lot of that after the click kind of stuff that, we end up needing to lean into if we want to make our campaigns really work well.
Yeah, 100%. The one thing you mentioned a second ago, which was around how do you make sure that the quality of the activities there, or how do you sort of make sure that demand is being captured in the right way? It made me think of, how often do you have conversations around like, okay, so we've captured all the local, very high intent demand. How do we then go to the next level? And what does that look like for local? Is it the same way you'd think about any full funnel strategy for a client, or is it slightly different for a local business?
Yeah, it can be a lot different. So, for a lot of businesses, like even if you're targeting, say, the whole United States, you get things working well, and you can kind of scale up, and there's a lot of demand out there, and you can just kind of keep growing into it. For local businesses, there tends to be kind of a finite geographical area that's what they serve. Like I can't expand that unless they're willing to expand their service area. And there's all kinds of limitations that could come with that. So you definitely can run into situations where there just isn't like we're capturing what we're going to capture. Like, it doesn't make sense to try to do more. And so sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's literally just like, we're hitting your goals, we're driving what you want to drive. Like there doesn't look to be that much more opportunity out there, because like there's only so many people, right? But sometimes it still is similar to, pushing into a full funnel strategy for, another client. Like I've added demand gen for clients to push into, kind of more upper funnel type stuff. There's YouTube presents opportunities for that kind of stuff. And so there's still the ability to kind of move upper funnel and try to hit awareness and do some of those things. The biggest challenge I find is you need clients that want to do that and are okay with that. Local businesses tend to be small and, they're owned by a single person or something, right? And so if their margin shrinks, their income shrinks. And, so sometimes they don't necessarily want to do that kind of stuff because they don't have that immediate result from it.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking as you were talking there is the immediacy of the spend. Like it's very easy with a lot of stuff we talked about, but when you start going a little bit further into the funnel, the payback is a little bit longer. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The last question I have for you is, what are like the top things that local businesses should be doing either today or thinking about tomorrow that you're not necessarily seeing much of? Like what's the common thing that moves the needle the most that you are talking about or thinking about?
The first one that comes to mind is improving their websites. You still find a lot that have a very old website or very limited functionality. And I think that's a conversation that I will have up front a lot of times when I'm talking with businesses, like, hey, like you need better landing pages, or you need better, ways of getting people to convert on your website. I can't just send people to your homepage and hope that it works out. And so I think I think that'll only become more important as you get into stuff like, AI Max or even broad match keywords and PMAX, that kind of things, like they use signals from your website. They use data from your website to inform, targeting and stuff like that. And so if your landing page is not matching what you're trying to do, it can affect how well those campaigns function. And that's only going to become more common. So I think that's, a better website is a big one. Making sure that they lean into local assets is a big thing. Like I said, phone numbers, your Google business profile, and then making sure that you're prepared to handle what comes after those sorts of things. Is somebody going to answer the phone? Are they able to, work people through the, whatever your sales funnel looks like? Is somebody actually responding to forms that are filled out on the website? Like those sorts of things. Like those are again, a really critical piece of all of this. And then I think there's still got to be a level of flexibility around what we track. What does return look like? If you're going to make Google effective, you have to have the data to make it effective. And the more that things evolve, the more automated it gets, the more critical that gets. And I think at times we have to get more creative for local businesses because of those sorts of things. Like we talked about, like micro conversions, those sorts of things. Like you have to get a little more creative, and it takes a lot more thought process, a lot more planning to use those types of things and make sure that they're actually still leading to the results you want. Like you're not, if you're tracking a basic form fill or somebody's clicking to start a video on your website or something like that, like you need to make sure that those are still signals that people are actually moving towards your end goal. And there's a lot more planning and strategy and thought process that goes into those sorts of things. And so I think that businesses need to be prepared to think through and be flexible for those kind of things going forward.
Yep. And it feels like the things you've mentioned there, they're all part of a trend that's going to continue. So it's not something you can avoid. There's no like hacks or ways around it. You've just kind of realize the reality and like lean into that. And like you said, sometimes you've got to be creative because you don't have the perfect setup, enough data, but there are ways to get around that and test and be creative. So
yeah, absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. Awesome. This is really good. Thanks for coming on, Jack. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great. I enjoyed talking about it. So